Well, bon dia, bonjour, good morning, herzlich willkommen, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this first discussion. I'm sending you warm wishes from Sandton, Johannesburg in South Africa as we unpack one mammoth conversation as we kick off today. I'm going to start off with a personal story. And about 2-3 years ago, I was heading up an events company for Forbes and CNBC Africa. And we went out to produce a roadshow in the build-up to what was going to be the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, the first of its kind in Cairo, Egypt. And it was a fascinating exercise in doing business across the continent, but also learning about how business is done across the continent and developing that intra-Africa trade. And it was the first time that I'd started dealing with this particular topic. It was almost on the doorstep of being implemented. And so much has changed over the last couple of months and years since that conversation. And as I picked up in the opening remarks, it's about connecting the dots right now and looking at the future of Africa. I had a quick look at what the World Bank had to say about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and we're going to start referring to it as the EAF2021. I don't know which one's easier to pronounce, but we'll go with the abbreviation. And they say that it presents a major opportunity for African countries to bring 30 million people out of extreme poverty and to raise the incomes of 68 million others who live on less than $5.50 per day. The Institute of Security Studies says it's simple in theory, but complex in reality. Well, the trading wheels have started turning as of January 2021, and I think the global pandemic has certainly not made things easier. But joining me for this conversation is Andrew Nevin, Financial Services Leader and Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria. Andrew, good morning to you.
Good morning. Wonderful to be here with you, Alexander.
And it's wonderful to have you as part of this conversation. Andrew, to ease us into this mammoth project, maybe you can just provide us with a brief overview of where are we at right now when it comes to the AFCFTA?
Well, I think with the AFCFTA, we're right at the beginning, and I think that people maybe think this is going to be a short-term project. I mean, the reality is AFCFTA is part of the AU's 2063 plan, 50-year plan. If you look at free trade agreements around the world and economic integration, I mean, it takes decades. So we're right at the beginning. And I think the numbers that you cited are a great underestimate of the eventual impact of this. This will be the world's largest free trade area. You've got 54 countries involved. You already have more trade than people understand that's going on because we always use formal statistics. But the impact of this is going to be immense. I mean, at the end of the day, the only prosperous Africa is where Africans trade with Africa.
Well, we've got 30 minutes to digest all of this, and I'm going to break this conversation down into its elements, namely expectations, issues, and problems. And to kick this off, some are calling it a huge step forward, and others are calling it a drop in the ocean. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
No, I'm clearly it's a huge step forward. I mean, let's just kind of look at some of the numbers here. I mean, Africa is immense. It's going to 2 billion people, young populations we discussed. I mean, there were 40 million children born in Africa in 2020, and there were only 5 million born in all of Europe, extended Europe on that. So, I mean, the economic weight is moving over to Africa. And as I said before, I mean, Africa can only be prosperous if Africans trade with Africans. Now, why is that? That is because if you're that large, if you're 2 billion people, and your only source of wealth is commodity products. Commodities represent 5 to 10% of GDP. By definition, you're going to be poor. So you have to be higher up the value-added chain. So the only way to be wealthy, to be prosperous in Africa in the future, is for Africans to trade with Africans. And this is the first step on it. And I think that maybe people on the outside who are a little bit cynical about this don't recognize the kind of degree of political will that's behind this. I mean, obviously you have His Excellency President Kagame who's really driven this, but many leaders in Africa see this as kind of new Pan-Africanism, and there's a lot of goodwill for it. Now, of course, we're going to get into some of the practical issues about it, but as I said before, this takes decades to form. I think Africa will go faster than other places. I'm Canadian. I remember the Auto Pact in 1965. I remember the Free Trade Agreement in 1989, and then NAFTA subsequently. I mean, these are multi-decade projects. The AU recognizes that, but we're on the first step to it, and it's really exciting.
Well, certainly some examples and some models to follow and to base this on. We will be breaking down some, I think, of some of the everyday issues that we're going to have to tackle to make this work. But as you've mentioned, it lays a foundation for Africa's advancement. Is there possibility that this could also create an unraveling of African unity and cooperation?
No, I mean, I don't see that. I mean, I've seen I've been here more than a decade in Nigeria, and I mean, there's a narrative on the outside about Africa in general, particularly about Nigeria, which is the continent's highest population country, that I think is inaccurate. I mean, there is so much energy in this continent. There's so much going on. As I said before, official statistics don't capture it. If you just take trade, for example, there's an immense amount of, what we would call in the West kind of informal trade. It's not captured in the official trade statistics. If you look in West Africa, where I'm based, you look at the traditional trade routes, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Benin. There's a lot happening. And it turns out when you dig into it that the value-added trade, the trade that is informal, has a higher value added. It tends to be manufactured goods from the region that are moving around. And this is not being captured by official statistics. So there's already a base there, and Africa is going to build on it. And this goes on all over the continent. And of course, we're going to get into the specific issues around infrastructure, around payment systems, around the government's role in it, and the customs, and some of the challenges that are all there. But I can tell you, when you're sitting here in the continent, these problems are getting solved. And what took decades in other jurisdictions is only going to take years here. So I'm very optimistic. And I think it's just another part of this negative Africa narrative that is just simply not accurate when you're kind of based in the continent talking about this. And I coined the phrase more than a decade ago. Europe needs Africa a lot more than Africa needs Europe. Africa is on the march. It has trading partners, and obviously within itself, we're talking about AFCFTA, but it has multiple trading blocks around the world. If Europe needs to be part of it, it needs to make itself relevant to Africa.
There's obviously a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement in the build-up to the date when it all gets going, or got going. And then it's obviously then having to keep that momentum. And as the carpenters would say, we've only just begun. What are some of the short wins right now that could help keep the momentum going on what is going to be quite a long journey?
Well, I think in West Africa, particularly, so sorry, if I just say East Africa for a moment, they've been on this journey for a long time. The economic integration, if you take Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, for example, as four nations, they've been on this economic integration. The region's done very well. Its headline growth numbers are very good. In West Africa, we've been hampered by colonialism, right? Because it's carved us up into French West Africa and English West Africa, and it's difficult to the trade relations have been fraught. Nigeria hasn't always come to the table in terms of ECOWAS, for example. But in terms of short-term wins, I can tell you today, after this event, I'm doing another event with the government of Nigeria, specifically talking about, led by the AFCFTA committee here, Action Committee on AFCFTA. Absolute commitment to break through some of these barriers. So that have Nigeria come to the table is a big step. We are the largest economy by far in Africa, certainly after we're rebased. The commitment now to build out this infrastructure in West Africa, to bring some of these informal trade routes more into the formal system on that. So I think we've had some short-term wins, and certainly the West African Francophone countries have been behind us. Ghana is behind us. If you take one corridor, for example, Ivory Coast, Ghana, they're separated linguistically by the official languages, the French and the English bloc, but actually there's been an increasing amount of trade there. There's infrastructure is one of the key elements of this, physically moving goods, and on that, we're developing the Lagos to Abidjan corridor, and obviously Ghana is part of that, Accra to Abidjan, that's being improved on that. So I think we've taken some first steps, and I think from a corporate viewpoint, corporations are all making plans to how are they going to participate in this in terms of that. And they're obviously, as I said, it's a journey, so it's not going to be an immediate step of putting a factory here or there, but there are planning there. There will be investments in other countries. We're seeing more and more Pan-African groups emerge. Certainly financial services, which is the clients that I tend to serve, have been marching across Africa. They're very encouraged by the flows that are going to come out of the AFCFTA on that. So you can see this integration happening. And of course, on physical goods side, for example, Dangote cement for really more than a decade has been marching across Africa. The fact now you have AFCFTA makes it a little easier in terms of the working between countries on that. So there's a lot of progress already out of the blocks, and it's just going to continue.
Well, we've touched on it already in quite a few ways to say that there's been this political will that has managed to get us this far. But unfortunately, like we've also pointed out, this doesn't happen in one term. There's a lot of political will that'll still need to keep going, and that'll have to keep this going over a longer period of time, and keeping all the countries together and keep believing in where this is going and where this is going to end. Not so?
No, absolutely. But I think that one thing that's certainly in the time that I've been in Africa that you've seen is, I mean, certainly in Nigeria, I mean, politicians respond to political pressure. We're a young continent. I mean, young Nigerians, they're connected. They're connected to the internet. They're connected to the other Africans. They're connected to the world, connected to all of these technologies on that. And they put pressure on the system. And, politicians are not unaware that they have this youth bulge that they need to satisfy with education, with employment, with rising prosperity on that. And that puts pressure on the system. So it's difficult for me to see, politicians, I mean, you may see pockets of it. Obviously, Ethiopia is struggling right now, for example, with security situation on that. You're going to see pockets where people go back. But I mean, certainly the last decade, the march has been to stronger and stronger democracy. Ghana has had a number of peaceful transitions of power. We had the largest transition of power peacefully with the opposition party winning in 2015, re-election of the president. We're coming up to 2023. I mean, there's always some complexity on that, but I think the election here is going to go well. So, I mean, there's really positive momentum around it. And of course, from the outside world, as I said, there's always a bit of a negative narrative. And there's been a negative narrative around the kind of headline economic growth, which I think it doesn't capture the full range of economic activity. But the reason for that is because of Nigeria and South Africa. If you actually look at many other countries from a headline economic growth, GDP, which is not the best measure, but is a measure we use. I mean, whether you Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, have all been doing very well on that measure. So I think that the momentum is there. I think there's the intellectual understanding that Africans need to work with Africans. I mean, there's a Pan-Africanism, as I said, that I think is very strong, even among Nigerians who are, of course, wedded to their tribe, wedded to their home state, somewhat wedded to Nigeria, but think of themselves as Africans on there. So I don't think this momentum for AFCFTA can be reversed, quite frankly. I think what we do need to see, however, we need to see South Africa come along. They're still a little bit separate in the continent, the way they participate in it. They talk about South Africa and Africa as if they're not in Africa sometimes. Their investments in Africa have been declining. They pull down the headline growth that the IMF or the World Bank reports for sub-Saharan Africa. And obviously we need some better official statistics coming out of Nigeria as we bumped along the last few years. Headline growth, official growth a little below the population growth.
Andrew, I smile because some of those words ring quite true. And I think it's also quite important for a lot of South African counterparts to also take some time to travel the continent, because you don't quite know where everything is happening until you've had a Mr. Biggs in Lagos, or you've been to the streets of Kigali and experienced Africa at its best. What is the role of Europe in the AFCFTA in terms of benefiting, but also contributing to the success of this?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think it's really critical for Africa needs Europe less than Europe needs Africa, reversing the way I said it before, but exactly the same sentiment. I mean, the Europe population is shrinking. It's impossible for Europe to have headline GDP growth. I mean, we always have the headlines, Europe's growing slowly, not growing. I mean, when you have the reduction in working age population that Europe has, it is a mathematical impossibility to have GDP growth. And as Europe ages, it actually needs Africa. It needs particularly African services. So maybe not connected directly to AFCFTA, but we had already seen prior to the COVID situation a massive migration, both let's call it illegal or informal, but also formal migration, very well-established diaspora in the UK and increasingly in other countries across Europe, very successful professional diaspora, huge economic impact. But Europe is going to need younger people to be able to function. And some of those younger people are going to be coming physically, I mean, particularly in the services sector, in education, in healthcare as Europe ages. But one of the things that we've started to realize with COVID is a lot of work can be done remotely. And what we're seeing in Nigeria right now is really quite extraordinary. We're getting more and more young Nigerians, educated Nigerians, hired by European companies, paid in euros or in pounds, who work remotely, are inserted into the global value-added chain. So I think that that's one trend that really benefits Europe as they find it harder and harder to get skilled workers. And it certainly benefits Africa. I mean, it benefits Africa, in my view, even if they emigrate, but it particularly benefits Africa if you've got Nigerian and African brains exported to Europe without the people physically leaving Nigeria. And I think that's a critical area for Europe. Of course, as AFCFTA rolls along, it's not just services that are going to be exchanged. So things like Nollywood, for example, from Nigeria, financial services, business process outsourcing, but there are still also physical goods. Now, to produce those physical goods needs machinery that needs to come from Europe, advanced machinery from Italy, from Germany, for example, on that. And I think there's a big role for Europeans in terms of technical skills around some of the engineering projects, some of the infrastructure that needs to be built. So Europe needs to make sure that as AFCFTA industrializes Africa and changes the trade corridors and upgrades the infrastructure, that's where Europeans with their very high value-added skills can participate in the economies of a growing African AFCFTA.
Well, let's get into some of these challenges and these issues that we've highlighted in the topic of this particular discussion. There's obviously the legal aspect. How easy is it to do business across Africa right now?
No, I think it's still very difficult, right? I mean, one of just to highlight kind of one issue I think that really needs to be at the top of the agenda, you need a harmonization of standards. I mean, if you think of the incredible success of the EU with people and goods, and I mean, the fact that you have one standard for food, one standard for healthcare, et cetera, is really a huge advantage, right? And obviously in the context of Africa with our limited resources and sometimes very small countries, to have multiple standards, so we have the Standards Organization of Nigeria, for example, or NAFDAC, which does the food and drugs, food and pharmaceuticals. When you have those multiple standards, it really create costs. So I think that that's one barrier that needs to be solved. But I think I hope there's the will to see that having these multiple standards is really very costly to the system, and that once you can produce good or service that you can then export to multiple countries in the region or across Africa, it's just so much more efficient. So that's one barrier that I would really highlight. Of course, we also have the infrastructure barrier. I mean, we need to build the rail networks, the road networks that connect things together. I mean, particularly in West Africa, as I said, it's critical that we get the Lagos to Abidjan corridor, but it's also critical that we get north-south links. As I said before, there's a huge amount of trade that happens north-south in West Africa, and the Nigerian government's actually made the effort to kind of extend its rail into Niger, for example, on that. So those are a couple of the issues that there needs to be both investment, but also this continued political will to get the harmonization and get one integrated system.
Well, one of the topics that we touched on just before we jumped onto this call was logistics. You've touched on it now in terms of infrastructure on roads, but flights. Those air corridors, and I'd mentioned the example of flying from Johannesburg to Casablanca. You corrected me very quickly and said, well, what about Johannesburg to Lagos? I'm going to add Cape Town to Accra. A friend of mine's in the drone business, and he had to fly via Ethiopia to get to Ghana on his recent business trip. That surely is a really key thing, is to have that basic infrastructure in place to be able just to go for a business meeting.
Yeah, and I mean, we had obviously made some progress here before COVID, but I mean, we've been hampered by the whole airline industry globally, not just Africa, of course. And then we've had a particular problem with the bankruptcy of South African Airways, which took away a lot of the direct flights out of South Africa. I mean, there's obviously a lot of energy to build up aviation, but one of the problems that we're finding in Nigeria, of course, is we're suffering from a dollar shortage at the moment. And almost every cost that comes, probably 95 to 98% of the costs that come from aviation, are effectively in dollar terms. The planes in dollar terms, the maintenance in dollar terms. Often the crews are sourced from abroad in some cases. So I think there's going to be some effort to have to rebuild it back. But you cite Ethiopian Airlines. I mean, it's what a fantastic success story for Africa. I was in the lounge one day. I don't know where I was heading. I might have been heading to Dubai and Emirates, but in the lounge in Lagos, and close colleague of mine who works for, not colleague, but friend of mine who works for a Japanese company was getting on Ethiopian Airways because that was the best way to get to Tokyo, for example. So, I mean, we've shown with Ethiopia that you can have a fantastic success story. I think South African Airways is being rebuilt now, and I hope it's rebuilt on kind of a profitable footing. Rwanda Air has really emerged as an African powerhouse. Kenya Airways has always been strong. So we're rebuilding, and of course, we've got Ethiopia participates in West Africa through a Sky, and we have a connectivity into North America. So as aviation comes back, we hope to get it, but certainly we need that Johannesburg-Lagos flight. We definitely need Cape Town a flight, but I mean, it's going to come when there's more and more business activity as the economies get better. I mean, it's going to happen. And of course, Ghana is just a great success story on many, many dimensions, not just the economic dimension, but the education, the governance, the judiciary, the peaceful transfer of power, the way they manage it. And so it's getting more and more international attention, more and more investment on there. So I'm pretty sure we'll see a Cape Town to Accra flight pretty soon.
Well, I'm glad you touched on another interesting topic about this, and I know time runneth incredibly quicketh, but let's quickly talk about the US dollar, a non-African currency that is pretty much the dominant currency in Africa. What is the barrier there? I mean, should we be looking at a Pan-African currency? Should we be looking at a digital currency? I know that's very topical at the moment right now.
Yeah, so I mean, I've advocated for some time that we need to take the U.S. dollar out of the system. I mean, we've been working. We try to put an estimate on the cost to the African economies, sub-Saharan African economies, of using the U.S. dollar. I'm not sure what the number is. Maybe I'll come out here and say I suspect that when we finish our calculation, it'll be in excess of $5 billion a year, perhaps more. I mean, it's a real hindrance. And I was very worried when Facebook announced Libra, because the concern was Libra would become effectively the trading currency for Africa. Now that got knocked back for other reasons, but we've advocated over the years that there should be not necessarily a single currency, but we could create a digital asset that's underlying, that was a asset-backed asset, that was where the asset that backing are sovereign bonds from different African countries. So you could imagine if we had that basket of currencies roughly in proportion to the size of the economies, interest-bearing, that could become a trading currency within Africa as a first step to eventually perhaps having a single currency. But I'm not sure that's the critical part. The critical part is, can we trade in local currencies or in this hybrid currency on that? Now, there's been a lot of progress on that. I mean, EcoBank in particular, Afreximbank have both been working very hard so that you can start to trade. I mean, if you think of the trade between Nigeria and Ghana, for example, there's two-way trade. So why would you say, if you were sourcing something from Ghana, you have to then source dollars? The person in Ghana largely needs cedis, and vice versa. I mean, if there's trade both ways, you should be able to use the local currency. So there's been quite a bit of progress on that. In terms of digital assets on that, I mean, I think we're down really far down this path on that. I mean, in Nigeria, it's reported to be the second largest trader of digital assets, cryptocurrencies. But what that meant is that young Nigerians know how this technology works. And of course, the technology applies not just to crypto assets, but also can be tokenized traditional assets and of course currency. So Nigeria is going to be the first large country that has the large-scale central bank digital currency, the e-Naira. The central bank has been working very hard for a number of years. It wanted to bring it out on October 1st because of Independence Day. Didn't quite get there, but I'm pretty sure before the end of the month we'll have the e-Naira out. So once you have the e-Naira out and people really get comfortable using digital assets, DLT assets in their day-to-day transactions, there are many, many things that we can do that can enhance African trade. So I can very quickly see a situation where Africa's the leader in this. Ghana is also working on its digital currency. I'm not sure about the other West African states, but I assume Kenya's working on it, Uganda's working on it. So I think it's very exciting for that. And for anyone who hasn't ever traded, I want people on this session, what percentage of people have ever traded these crypto assets, if you call them what they are. But once you understand how the technology works, you just understand the immense value. And so what we're going to see in Africa in this payment system is a leapfrogging. And just in the same way, there's no fixed telephony system. I mean, everything has gone mobile. In fact, Nigeria is the by percentage of data usage is the highest country that uses mobile data versus, say, fixed computer. We're going to see exactly the same thing happen in the payment system, where people very quickly go to these digital assets. I mean, I suspect one of the reasons I know the CBN here delayed a little bit the ENIR was that the response, when they just put out the press release and put up the website, the response was so overwhelming they had to go back and increase the capacity of the system because they were worried it would be just overwhelmed. So I mean, that's all very exciting. So I think we're going to solve the dollar problem in Africa. That we're very well aware of it. But as I said, PwC is going to come out, PwC Africa, and put out a paper on it, I hope soon. But my guess, I'll just call it a guess, is at least cost the continent $5 billion a year, the fact that we do intra-Africa trade using US dollars.
Well, Andrew, as we have a little bit under a minute left, I want to give you one more chance just to finish off with one sentence on, as we close, what would the result be of not seeing the AFCFTA through?
I mean, Africa cannot prosper if it continues to be 54 countries that kind of work economically interdependent. The prosperity of Africa depends on Africans trading and investing with Africans. So this project has to work.
Well, I think that is the right note to end it on. This project has to work. We've touched on so many of the key challenges and some of the key things that will make this work and the reason they should work. And I really look forward to having this conversation again in the near future. Andrew Nevin, he's the financial services leader and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, and back to the team in Portugal.